Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I am Luke Freeman.
And I'm Chris Province. And today I'm excited, man. We're going to talk about intrinsic motivation and ethical behavior and what an idea for organizations. And we're just going to jump right in because I see you on the TikTok. And, I thought it was really interesting. You kind of went down this path of, hey, here's some information we're seeing from some team member surveys that we're executing about how people are engaged and how that is tying back to their modalities, right?
Yeah.
Are they in the office all the time? Are they, part-time work from home? Are they full-time work from home? And what we're seeing is some discrepancies in levels of engagement, right? So you kind of went public with some of these findings and lots of banter out there on the platform. I think you see the ethics start to show up, right? And the range of ethics. And I think it really calls out that when we talk about, morals specifically, they're relational, they're situational, and they're dynamic. And you see kind of the whole range show up in how people are responding to the only thing that matters in a workplace is we're square every 2 weeks, to I have all these different types of income in my work. Some of it's intellectual, some of it's wage, some of it is the contribution I get to make. I mean, those are two very different ends of the spectrum. So share with me, what's been your experience like going through this, kind of having the conversations and your own internal kind of monologue around ethics and work?
Yeah. And I like how you teed that up. I mean, all of that feels really authentic and accurate to what, I've been interacting with people on the platform around. So yeah, just to go back, shared a little bit about an employee satisfaction and engagement study that we did. And one of the ones that we conducted for a client showed higher levels of engagement for people who are fully remote than people who are hybrid, in the office part of the time, which I thought was interesting. So I made a little post about it. And then, it kind of went crazy and blew up. And there's, 1,300 comments at this point on it. And so I've been trying to respond to those and interact with people and ask follow-up questions and share my thoughts on it. But what really has emerged is this two ways of thinking about work. And I'll say at least what's showing up in the comments on my post in particular is this prevalent view that me trading my time for a set dollar figure and that transaction, like that is the ethics of work. If I choose to enter into a relationship and I get paid fairly for my time, that's as good as it's supposed to be. And I've, some of my response to that theme that came up in the comments was like, I've done follow-up posts like, I think we should care more than that. I think there's something more than that. And that goes all the way back to, I remember I was probably 30 and I was sitting down talking to one of my mentors at work. And I'm sure we were talking through, me like really hand wringing about, oh, what should I do? What should we do? Like caring deeply about a project or about a priority or a strategy we were trying to execute. And I remember him saying, like, Luke, I think you're thinking about this too much. Like, what I always remember is that every 2 weeks we're square, right? I've put my time in, I've got my paycheck. Like, I don't have to feel any certain way about it. And that never sat right with me. Like, I wanted to believe that because he was a mentor and I still do have a lot of respect for the person that shared that with me. But I was always just like, it wasn't good enough. And so that's the other theme that I see in the comments is people that want something more. They want meaningful connection. They want a place where they're not just, taking their personal purpose in life totally setting it to the side for 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day, not thinking about it. And then, okay, I'm done with work. I can come and put back on my personal purpose and live in alignment with it. Like, that's not good enough. It's never been good enough for me. And I'm seeing that trend as kind of that competing ethics of work.
Well, if everybody could just check the box of compensation, right, which historically is only defined as wage plus benefit plus recognition expense. Like, last I checked, most people accept the jobs understanding what the compensation is. So why would they leave?
Right.
I mean, the system tells you that approach isn't functional.
Right.
But instead of looking at the system that we're operating, I think we lean more on like, well, no one wants to do the work for that price.
Yeah.
Right. Or just no one wants to work. Like, we hear that regularly. And we keep blaming the people instead of the other incomes or like leadership. And what is our role? Not looking past wage, benefits, and cost of recognition, which is your 10-year watch and your 15-year ring or whatever you've got relative to that we've talked about that, ad nauseum. But this idea, like, where does real fulfillment come from? And thinking, like, rethinking personal income. So my personal income is certainly comprised of wage and benefits and the 15-year ring and the 10-year watch. But, what are those other things? There might be acute physical benefit of a particular job.
Right.
There's intellectual income. There could, be a spiritual loop with the work that I do. But it feels like, how does the job advance my purpose? How much autonomy do I have? How much personal growth do I get to experience? What are the technical skills or technical competencies that I'm getting to grow? Like, joy, maybe? Does joy play a role in income? I mean, these other social factors that definitely play a role in where I'm at, if I stay, my level of fulfillment. It kind of, as you try that on, is it possible that leaders and organizations just define income differently?
Well, I mean, as you walk through all of that, what it makes me think of is this idea that people don't always tell the truth.
Right.
So
buyers are liars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we might say, all I care about is a fair wage for the time that I put in. And the majority of people might say that. But what we see is that most people who leave, right, they're not going to substantially higher income generating jobs, right? They might get a little bit of a bump. For the most part, though, similar sector, similar type of role, right? They're leaving because of something else. It's not that the deal got completely messed up financially.
Right. It's not the financial deal.
There's something else that has happened. And, the data backs that up. Gallup's 30, 40 million data points at this point say that 70% of someone's engagement at work is explained by their relationship with their direct supervisor. And so, if people were robots, and it doesn't matter if someone's really being an asshole to us or not, then, okay, I work, I show up for the money, we're square every 2 weeks, right? But that's not how humans operate.
Right.
Humans want to be in spaces that align with their values. Like, we might have created this whole home versus work, versus personal fulfillment somewhere else, but that's a modern invention. For the majority of the history of our species, no such dualistic or, divided out existence existed. We worked with our families, we lived with our families, right? We contributed to our communities or didn't. And that had to do with building our homes together and working our fields together and tending our animals together and helping someone when they were sick together, and all of those things. And so, I hear the argument of we're square every 2 weeks, but I don't think we really work that way.
And I think here's probably maybe the strongest argument that I can make about why that's not always the case. And I think you can come closer based on what we know in science. Like, you can come closer to justifying trade hours for dollars in a production type environment. Like, where if I can work harder, I can make more.
Yeah.
Right. But we know that that motivational schematic does not hold true in service organizations. So I think that's one piece, is transaction is a little more productive in manufacturing than it is in service.
Well, let me say that another way. I would say in work environments that are gamified to a certain degree, then people can have that intrinsic motivation and stay engaged regardless of maybe relationship with other people. So I'll give you a couple examples besides manufacturing. When I think about a workforce that is incredibly gamified, and by gamification, I just mean you know what it takes to level up. The next level up is, for the most part, within reach. It requires work to get there, but it is like you can see the path. It's super clearly spelled out, right? So think of a video game, right? Mm-hmm. That's why it's called gamification. But military, right?
Mm-hmm.
People play the military leadership path as if it's a video game, right? They know what the next rank is. They know what it takes to get there. They know that X% of the people trying to attain that next level will attain it. And they get to choose whether they're going to opt into that game or opt out. And the rules are super clear,
mm-hmm.
right? Another example is, like you said, people whose activity dictates their income. So when we look at like multi-level marketing, like the relationships are secondary.
Right. Or a lot of sales, right?
Right. Sales. Yeah. Yeah. And it's very clear. This is my compensation schematic if I'm in sales. So I'm going to go play that game.
Right.
And I'm playing it for one person, myself.
Right. Well, and I think let's pull some thread here. Maybe it's that when I'm operating in a gamified environment, it's really devoid of moral reasoning, right? Once we bring moral reasoning into the equation, where in order to engage, I'm asking you, like, is the character of this organization or the cause of this organization, is it worthy of your effort? Now things change.
Yeah.
Right. So this whole idea that we're square every 2 weeks, like that is the moral reasoning for that person. And I'm not here to say wrong or right.
Sure.
Okay. But for people that have different moral reasonings, maybe they define personal income as something other than wage plus benefit plus recognition cost. For people that have that reasoning, it could be why those purpose-driven, impact-driven, outcome-driven organizations have an advantage over those that they compete with that fail on the moral reasoning front.
Yeah, there's a little bit of chicken and egg scenario here,
mm-hmm.
right? If you have an organization with a strong shared purpose, there's going to be an attraction of people who align with that purpose, right? If it's clear, if it's authentic, if we communicate it, we're going to attract people that believe it. And, not that we're trying to manipulate them, but the science says if people believe in a shared purpose, they're going to work harder,
mm-hmm.
right? So that's one way that those organizations compete. Another is that, folks who are more interested in a more transactional experience, might be drawn to organizations that function a little bit more. We're transacting time for dollars. And it would make sense then, right? If the organization is aligned with the people's values of being transactional, that why would you expect extra effort above and beyond what's required from that workforce?
Right. And I think in all of this, we're acknowledging that values, like by design, should and will vary across organizations.
Yep.
So what's okay in one environment may not be an acceptable behavior in another. But ultimately, it's about, I think that as a team member, as I'm going in to consider an organization, I have to consider if what I believe is aligned with the organization I'm considering becoming a part of, and vice versa. Right? If we believe as an organization that we're square every 2 weeks, then that should be explicitly clear to the people signing on,
Right.
and avoid attracting candidates and team members that want to reason around other types of income, because that's not what we do here, right? And for the company that wants to be purpose driven and provide development or joy or these other things as primary considerations for why someone should work there, that should be explicit as well. Because if you get someone in a purpose driven environment that's all about joy and personal development and technical advancement and all of that, but the company is really about, hey, we're square every 2 weeks, you're going to have suffering involved.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of wasted effort. And I think that's really the idea is not to lay judgment on this idea that we're square every 2 weeks. Like you trade your hours for dollars. Like that in and of itself isn't wrong. It creates suffering when one person in that deal doesn't understand that's the deal.
Right. Right.
So I think as long as everyone's explicit, things become a little bit easier.
Yeah. And to go back to the conversation and, the 1,000 TikTok comments, you see that. You see people saying, why are you trying to manipulate me through some sort of employee engagement initiative to care more than I want to care? I just want to trade my hours for your dollars. And like, who cares if you give me a pizza party? Right. There's been several pizza party comments. Right. I don't care about that. I don't want that. Don't try and make me care more.
Did you say pizza parties are satisfiers, not engagement tools?
No. My rule is I only reply to things that are not negative.
Right.
So I'm giving the negativity no oxygen. That's my strategy. It's not working.
Well, let's kind of go into this idea of like self-determination, which basically says, every human is naturally motivated, curious, interested, and we want to succeed because this idea of succeeding is in itself somehow rewarding. So how do you balance this idea of, I think what a lot of people feel, like there's just this draw, this tug, this pull towards something that feels like success.
Yeah.
With all of this, right? With the organizational characters that we have in operating in the economy.
Right. So we're small business owners, right? So I'm speaking to kind of owners of private business or leaders of an organization that does have some sort of stated social good. Like I as a business owner, I do not get why anyone would not want to allow people to experience fulfillment and success and some sort of transformational growth in their work role. Because if I provide that, I win. My business is going to have so much more, runway.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't understand why people don't want that to be a part of what they offer to their people. Because I'm not saying this is a right or wrong thing, because I'll agree with you. If there's a more of a transactional organization that has a more transactional workforce, like I don't think that's morally wrong. I though, as a leader, I know there's a need. People want to progress and grow. I want my business to progress and grow. Why in the world would I not want to really focus on that happening together? And that doesn't mean that someone that wants to be transactional is a bad person. It just means like my place probably isn't the place for them, because here we've decided like we're going to be excited about all facets of life, growing all the facets of our life together, and really transforming and becoming better versions of ourselves year after year after year. And why I don't want anyone to have to put put that pursuit, that human pursuit, up on the shelf whenever they clock into work.
So we see this need for growth and for development. And, I think you make a great call to leaders to say, can you see it too? Can you see a road or a path of development for the people that work around you, that when they travel it, your business becomes healthier? 100%. But I want to get uncomfortable for a minute and say, can we as living things, as people, can we grow if we're not loved and cared for? And is that not where some of this line gets drawn? Is you have leaders that have the capacity to love and care for every person, and you have leaders that maybe don't have that capacity or don't want to admit that capacity?
Yeah. I mean, uncomfortable, sure. But I'll go back to, who I think is one of the thought leaders here, Edward Friedman, who was a psychologist and also a leadership development thought leader in the late 90s. He has this quote, and I'm not going to remember it word for word, but he said, as I worked with organizations, what I found to be a universal law over and over again is that the organization cannot rise to a maturity level that's higher than the maturity level of its senior most leader. And that's a hard thing for me to read. And I've kept that in mind working with organization after organization and tried to find the exception. I haven't found it yet.
I have not seen an exception. That's it. And that idea of the organizational character being defined by the most senior person's values.
And not just values, but
right. Well, yeah.
I mean, I say maturity level, and I think Friedman said maturity level intentionally because clarity about our values, sure, that's a part of maturity, but also our self-regulation and our self-direction and self-determination. If we have a leader in any organizational setting that does not have agency over their own direction in life and clear boundaries about what behavior they will accept and not accept, it's going to be very difficult for that organization to be a well-regulated and mature organization. And why I said earlier that that's a hard quote to read is because I can't help thinking about my family or my business or teams that I'm a leader on, because it really puts all of that responsibility squarely back on me. And if I look at my family and say, things aren't healthy here, which I think all of us do from time to time, like it always comes back. It's a boomerang.
Yeah.
Like that line of thinking always comes back to what part of me is immature enough that I've allowed these processes, these relationships to be at whatever point they are today.
Right. Which I think that calls to the role of monitoring and how do we measure those things that matter. But I think that is a profound truth that for people to develop, they have to be loved and cared for. And if that's not a particular leader's game, then we need to talk about how we transact.
Yeah, because the rules exist for people who can't self-regulate. So the EPA, right? The EPA exists because a lot of organizations don't have the capacity to self-regulate and make ethical environmental decisions.
Right.
Consumer Protection Bureau, right? It exists because a lot of organizations within themselves don't have the capacity to make ethical decisions. And so those are transactional organizations, right? Any of them Consumer Protection Bureau, they will transact your ass if you get out of line, right?
Right.
They're not in it to be transformative.
Right.
And so I think what you're saying is a fair point in that if we don't have within ourselves the ability to say, these are my ethical boundaries, this is how we're going to show up ethically, morally in the world, then we probably should say, okay, like we better write down some rules.
Mm-hmm.
Or we better just log on to SHRM and download the sample employee handbook and talk to an attorney in our state and say, what are the rules we have to follow? Because I don't trust that we have the character to self-regulate here.
Right.
And that's a little over dramatic, right? We have to be careful. And, there are compliance issues that aren't intuitive, but you hear what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think that it's super interesting though, as far as I would say even the most purpose-driven, regulating organization, and I want to taint the water before I even ask you the question. Like, I believe that codes and code enforcement are required for organizations because you just don't know where misalignment is going to come from. And you don't want to wait for people to self-eject. So I'm interested, like, your take on codes and code enforcement and, like, why are they necessary?
Yeah, so my take is that we all contain a multitude of expressions of ourselves, and we are super influenced by the social settings that we're in, the systems we're in. And so we do have to really think wisely about what systems are we creating to reinforce our purpose, our values, right? How we want to show up morally and ethically. Without those rules, it's really easy to, in a situational context that's out of ordinary for us to behave differently. So for me, if I don't write down what my core values are and I don't write down the behaviors that support those core values for me, like, so one of mine is creativity. If I don't write down what it means to be creative, right? Learn some new form of art each year, right? Go to a museum every once in a while, like, be outdoors. Like, those are behaviors that I have to, like, go back and look at and say, have I done those? Or one of my values is learning. And so one of my behaviors is I want to learn a new business model every year. And by business model, I just mean I want to work with a client in some sort of sector I haven't worked in before once a year, right? Because if I don't do that, if I don't force myself to do that, I'm not going to be living out that core value of learning. So for an organization, yeah, we really should have clear rules about what it means to live out our values and to live in alignment with our organization's ethics, or we're going to forget. And it's way more complicated for an organization than me personally, right? Because there's a huge use case that in an organization, there's going to be some pocket of people with a rogue supervisor who they might not have even heard, or they might not talk regularly about what we believe as an organization.
Right. And this idea, I'm going to grab on the multitudes for a moment, because we need codes and code enforcement, because while we can choose to say that's Luke, there's different versions of you based on the situational context that you may find yourself in, or the conditions you're currently under influence of, subject to, what have you. And it becomes like, can we stay clear about which version of the person or of the people we're looking to emerge?
Yeah.
Right. So I think codes really make, whether it's guidelines, standards, what have you, like those organizational codes really make it explicit of these are the values or characteristics or attributes we're looking to emerge from people that work here. These are the attributes that if they show up, that person can't be there, right? Like, even if it's that particular multitude of the person, like, this can't exist here. And I think by having those codes, it gives us something to bind to, understand, work in the direction of, rather than having everything be organic, because in the organic setting, you get all the multitudes and it's very difficult to emerge a standard set of behaviors.
Yeah, and I'm going to go you one more and say instead of just codes, we also need practices and rituals to remind us of those codes. If we don't have a monthly all hands where we review what we believe and recognize people for being examples of what we believe, it's going to be way easier for us to drift off course. So I think about institutions and organizations that have stood the test of time, like they've got some heavy ritual in place. And when the ritual goes, all of a sudden it's everyone interpreting what the code means for themselves. And there's not that core meaning making and narrative building that's part of a healthy organization.
Yeah. And, what we see from healthy organizations are just kind of I would say some universal principles and we've talked about this on the podcast before, but I think it's important to discuss these things in light of ethics. And it's, there's three kind of universal principles of organizations, and organizations that satisfy these principles do kind of propagate or advance motivation. They get better, more productive behaviors, better developmental outcomes. And that's this idea of like mastery. We want to get better at what we do. Autonomy. We want to self-direct basically how our work gets done, and purpose, like kind of rallying around with a lot of other people working in a common direction. So as you kind of look across the horizon, where do you see where the organizations whose performance is challenged or they might be underperforming? Where is it? Is it typically in competence and mastery? Is it a function of autonomy? Is it a function of purpose or relatedness? Where does it show up?
Okay, we're going to go firmly into Luke's opinion and kind of futurism of
All
work.
right, what we're here for.
Thing here. I have kind of a crazy idea that technology provides, it's a modality for us to build our mastery and competence. And, I believe that a big reason why technology advances over the centuries is because people want to master something.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a cobbler and you've mastered the art of cobblery,
yeah,
and all of a sudden you've gone as far as the existing tools will take you, then you become a technologist and you create a new tool. And so I really believe that organizations at this point in history can probably depend on changes in technology to provide ongoing challenges to competence that will lead people to higher levels of mastery. Now, can you facilitate it more effectively? Can you make it clear to people? Can you reward and recognize people for new levels of mastery? Absolutely. But I don't think that's the big one. Autonomy, I think there's always going to be a conflict between people who are more collectivist and those who are more hierarchical. I don't know. That's probably not the right word. More individualistic versus more collectivist, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So there are going to be people that want to do really autonomous work, and people who are going to want to do work with more feedback loops and more team sessions. And I think a lot of that's just around job design and job fit. And surely, yes, organizations can train supervisors to be better at providing more autonomous work. I think this whole move to remote work has been a huge challenge for supervisors who really didn't know how they were supervising because they were sort of doing it on accident, like through scheduled meetings or by walking around. And now they're like, I don't even know what you're supposed to be producing. We don't have clear KPIs for your role. So I'm not even going to let you be autonomous and measure your results. I have to come get in your space, or you have to drive into the office or whatever. So that's an issue for sure. But I think this last one, to me, this goes back to how we started this conversation around this, is work transactional or is it communal in some way? But this idea of purpose and how we connect to one another and how we're related to one another at work. And again, we're totally in Luke opinion zone here, but I think the crumbling social framework of our country, the decline of local churches, the decline of trust in government institution, the decline of trust in universities and other institutions. There's a gap to be filled in where people connect around shared purpose. And I think businesses, and I'll say specifically private businesses, like there's a huge opportunity to fill the gap. And I just say private because I think publicly held ones, like they're a little bit handcuffed by the system that they're in. And they're so slow to change that there's a huge opportunity there. I'm not super hopeful like that they're going to execute it first. But I think, man, we look at all these small businesses across our country. I think they can provide meaningful community to the people who work there in really effective ways if we'll learn to do it.
Right.
And again, maybe going crazy here, but this whole like pastoral business management, like I think it's a thing. And I'm not putting a religious like overtones over that explicitly. I'm saying completely separate from whatever your beliefs are spiritually, this idea that someone who guides and stewards the development of a community of people and builds strong connection between them, also providing a good or service. Like, I think that intersection is going to continue to emerge, and we're going to continue to see businesses that really have it figured out well. And they're already out there. You go and look, but yeah, I think there's going to be this striation. Like, who does that and who continues to move transactional? And it might get to a point where if I'm just entering the workforce, I get to decide which of those I want to engage with.
Right.
And it's really clear to me, hey, this is a purpose-driven organization where I'm going to connect with a community that has shared values. And this is a place where I go and trade my hours for dollars. And again, like, not right or wrong.
Right.
But it might be so clear that it's really easy for me to just say, do I want option A or option B?
Well, and what's super interesting about that is you have kind of the transactional, and we'll call it extraction model, right? Versus the transformative developmental model. And it's not to say that transactional companies don't develop things. It just tends to be more linear. But something that we already know is, like, without a doubt, servant leaders create more ethical climates.
Yeah, there's data on that. That's not Luke's opinion. Right.
So, and that's ultimately what's good. If we talk about servant leadership influencing the environment where the team member operates, then what that team member carries to the customer or carries to their family. We also know there's spillover effect from someone being in an environment where servant leadership is the delivered prescription, right? Whether it's intentional or not.
Yeah.
So the idea of, servant leadership saying, well, I think a lot of people define it in a lot of different ways, but it's effectively putting the good of those led over the self-interest of the leader. So that previous idea, the transactional system where we're square every 2 weeks, right? Everyone's self-interest is served and we're square.
Yep.
In the servant leadership model, that really drives more ethical climate and spillover effect or individual benefit to the team member. It's about the team member's self-interest over that of the leader, but it's really focused on follower development, de-emphasizing the importance of the leader. like humble and responsible use of power, really authentic relationships, that community that you were talking about earlier. And it's really this comprehensive worldview of stakeholder perspective versus shareholder perspective. So in my transactional environment, I'm a leader or a shareholder. You are a worker or a shareholder. We make this transaction, and those are the only two perspectives that really matter. In a developmental type of environment, um, it's interesting to me just how clear the line is. It says servant leaders create more ethical environments, and those people are more fulfilled as a result of being connected to a servant leader. So yeah, kind of it just kind of creates this world. It's like maybe ethics aren't taught and learned, but they're certainly modeled and activated. I don't know. What's the word? I mean, what's your take on all this?
I think it's enabled.
Yeah.
Like if I'm part of a community where I'm not going to get taken advantage of, I am enabled to act in a more noble way
Mm-hmm.
because I don't have to be watching my back all the time. So in a high trust environment where we do have clear rules of engagement, and I trust that the character of the people leading me is high and that they have the competence to do their job and protect me, then my attention can go somewhere else besides self-protection. And I think we as people, whenever we're not worrying about protecting ourselves, like we start wanting to contribute.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'm kind of learning as we go here this idea that environments where servant leadership really takes hold, you have a lot of social learning taking place, right? About what makes this business work, what makes our team work, what resources do we need, what if we do it this way. And again, there's just more of that reasoning. Whereas,
Let me put it another way.
yeah,
I mean, it's two functions of the ego. So one is I have a weak ego, or it feels fragile or threatened. So my energy goes to protecting myself. Maybe I'm an employee, maybe I'm a leader in the organization. Either way, me focusing on protecting myself, my own self-interest, which ultimately is my own ego, because I don't want to lose, I don't want to fail, I don't want to see evidence that I am a failure. I want to see evidence that I'm good and smart and strong. That's one place I can put my energy. Flip side, if the ego is strong and secure, I don't have to spend energy trying to prop it up. My energy then can go to how do we as a community grow together?
mm-hmm.
And I guess the example of that is like, what do I do when we face criticism as a team? Do I blame, ferret out the source of who did the mess up, explain it away, whatever? Or do I respond with curiosity and say, this is an opportunity for my team and myself to all learn together?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we made a mistake doesn't mean that I'm not a good person or a good leader. It means we have an opportunity to grow. So like, let's engage that with curiosity.
Yeah. And it's ultimately about where we want the effort directed, right? In an environment where people are cared for, loved, and served, they're going to direct their attention differently than the environment where you do the work, you get paid, we're square every 2 weeks. Those are two different feelings. Those are two different companies. They probably have two different pathways. But I've got a couple things I just want you to try on for size.
Okay.
Okay. There's a saying like, hurt people,
Uh-huh.
right? And is it true that hurt people damage organizations? Or would it be true to say hurt people might cause chaos in communities? Or like hurt people are the ones that self-compensate? I mean, where are you at on that idea of moral injury and how that all plays out in these kind of misaligned systems? If you got a team member that reasons one way and an organization and leaders that reason another, what happens?
Yeah. So let me take what you're saying, and I'm going to say it a different way. And you tell me if this gets to the spirit of it. When I hear hurt people, what I hear you asking is when someone feels that they are separate from an organization, and they could be made to feel separate by being treated unfairly, by not being included, by not being given a voice, by whatever, right? Getting passed up for an opportunity and no one even told them that the job was open, right? They start to see themselves as other from the organization, not as an insider, but as an outsider. And what do we know about when people hurt other people? The first step towards hurting people is dehumanizing.
Mm-hmm.
They're different than me. They're not as good as me. They're in the wrong for all these reasons, because of the color of their skin, because they believe this political thing, because whatever. And the second I can see them as other and us as being separate, I get a step closer to being able to do harm. Or in the context of this conversation, act in unethical or immoral ways.
Right. And so I want to kind of bring it full circle. Like the extent to which an individual perceives that he or she is ignored or excluded can result in feeling uninformed. It's linked to all the deviant behaviors. It's deviance, conversion, theft, willingness to engage, or unwilling to engage as a citizen. Like, just all the bad stuff comes from being ostracized. So I think if you're going to transact, you certainly need you still need a rallying cry.
Yeah. Well,
So how do you do that? Like, if you're the organization that wants to transact, how do you create a rallying cry strong enough so people don't feel ostracized and exhibit deviant behaviors, whether it's social loafing, conversion, right? Whatever it is, all those self-compensating techniques or workplace deviance, how do you avoid that in a transactional environment?
I mean, I don't know. My only answers are bad answers. Like, you have a 100-page employee handbook, and you transact when someone doesn't follow the rules. I mean, I guess that's the answer. Because even when I think about, like, the example that we've talked about a couple times is, SpaceX or Tesla,
Mm-hmm.
and the approach that Elon has in those organizations has fared way better than in Twitter. I think it goes back to, like, engineers that were getting into those organizations knew what they were getting into. They were getting into an engineering setting where people grind it out in pursuit of finding innovative technological solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems. That's a purpose. Like, that's clarity about why we're all here doing it together.
Mm-hmm.
And so clarity about that, it does enable even what I would say is, like, not super helpful leadership style.
Yeah. Not super helpful is one way to put it. I mean, so I think that
we could say the largest destruction of wealth in the history of the human race.
Yeah.
Like, not great outcomes for that leadership style.
Right. Yeah.
But, that's, again, moving to my opinion.
And I think that's the whole idea is I'm trying to close the gap between what we know in social science. Like, unethical behavior is more likely to take place in environments that leave us feeling mechanized, alienated, silenced. Like, this whole idea of, like, we're square every 2 weeks. If you need other income, go somewhere else. Like,
Well,
all the science.
the first thing I start thinking is, like, okay,
Yeah.
if that's all this is,
Right.
like, and I could get $1 an hour more down the street, like, why would I ever not go take the $1 more an hour?
Right.
Which I think for people arguing for that, approach to work ethics would say, yeah, that's fine. That's how it works.
Yeah. And then the flip side of the coin, they say, well, how come nobody wants to work here
Right.
for what I want to pay them?
Yeah. I mean,
And
I think this should be enough. No one wants to work. Everyone's lazy.
Right. Because I think that number should be enough to get them to transact with me.
Yeah.
And that is what we're seeing in the workplace right now. We're seeing transactional organizations that are saying this is what it's about. And we're seeing purpose-driven organizations saying it's about development, it's about the people, it's about activating a purpose and that rallying cry. The performance of these two organizations right now is night and day. And then we have a whole lot of folks in the middle.
Yeah.
That are thriving. Depending on where they're at, the market they're in, they're getting by or they're having good quarters. But it has this feeling of unease.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of, that's my read on the market and the industry and kind of these different organizational approaches to income, compensation, ethics. What do you see something similar? Do you see something I don't?
No, I think the exit of boomers from the workforce and the influx of these younger generations, like, there's a wave of changing expectation for what a meaningful job is that's coming. And there is a third option that we haven't talked about. And I think this third option is actually what a lot of people are going to go to, which is gig economy. You want to transact with me and I want meaningful work? Fine. I'll be my own boss. I'll create my own meaning in my work and I'll be your vendor.
Mm-hmm.
And we can transact vendor to client. But let's be clear, I'm not your employee. I do not accept the terms of your employment.
Right.
And I really think that mechanisms for small business and entrepreneurship and solopreneur vendors, like, all of that's going to explode. And I think younger, even more tech-enabled generation is going to, they can do all of this from their home. Like, it's not hard to set up an LLC.
Right.
It's not hard to figure out how to be a 1099.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they've got the information on how to set up those structures, on how to enter into those relationships with customers. And I mean, we haven't even talked about AI yet. Like, people are going to be able to build businesses at scale by themselves.
Yeah.
As one person when they can harness that. So that's the third option. And I think traditional employers, like, ignore it at their peril.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Super interesting. And that's the idea, like, time will reveal all truths. And, I know that we will continue our journey to create sustainable, vibrant brands, kind of focused on, creating environments that focus on ethical behavior, have that spillover effect where you get individual development and team-based environments, but ultimately where we can create team members that are passionate about a company, about the way their leaders lead, so that ultimately the customers can be excited about that company and the products or services that those enterprises produce. Goodness knows there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, good thing we're fanatics.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, like, that's where it comes down to for me, is I'm a little fanatical about purpose first businesses. And, growing up in a family that, like, we didn't miss a Sunday going to church ever that I can remember, like, schedule vacation around it, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
like we made it happen because our family was really committed to that community and to the shared purpose. Okay, now here I am decades later, like the promise of the church, and I'm not trying to get all theological here, but was making the world a better place. Like that's what we were committed to, was this vision of the world being a better place. And, through organizational psychology and some of the paths that I've walked, and, here we are together. And like, I'm pretty fanatical about, I think organizations can have the same level of devotion and it not be a manipulative bad thing.
Right.
But like they can change the world. An organization is positioned to change the world if it can lean into and get really clear about what is its shared purpose? What's the thing that it's doing to make this world a better place? And it doesn't matter if it's manufacturing or hospitality or service or technology. Like it really is about, are we serious about this thing that we could do if the best possible scenario happened, we can impact the world in a huge way. And like, are people serious about that? And we are.
Yeah. And that's, and that's what I want to bring it home with. The idea, like, if we as business leaders do not believe it's possible to change the world, then we are inviting cynicism. This whole idea of every 2 weeks we're square, and I'll quote somebody we heard recently. You do with your money what you like to do, and I'll do with my money what I like to do. Those environments invite cynicism when that's what it's about. And the cynicism, like we talk about this, like cynicism murders hope. The ostracizing or ostracized team members are energized to behave in deviant ways. So as leaders, I think the calling is to create that community so that there is hope and we can remove some of that cynicism and know that it's possible to have powerful impact on the lives of the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis. I think that's a little bit about what makes us, different than the other players that operate in our space. Like we go to bed at night thinking about the organizations we work with.
Yep.
We don't transact. We are in it to make these transformations with the people that are nearest to us and love and care about people along the way. So if people want to get a hold of us, Luke, maybe how do they accomplish that?
Yeah. purposeandperformancegroup.com. Find us on LinkedIn.
Well, you're famous on TikTok. So
yeah.
How do they follow you on the TikTok, man? You're all over that thing.
I mean, I don't know anything about it.
Oh, you have a screen name or something, right?
It's at Luke_free_man. Luke Freeman.
Yeah.
But with some underscores.
All right. So check Luke out on there.
Yeah.
Always great insight. But yeah, as you guys continue to navigate this year, reach out. We're here to help any way we can on any day that we're available. So give us a call anytime. So Luke, thank you for jumping in here and kind of riffing on ethics and motivation and how we're seeing the world right now. And until next time, come back and join us here at Magic in the Room. Today's episode of Magic in the Room was hosted by Chris Province and produced by Ben West. Our theme music is provided by Evan Grimm, and you can find all of his music on Apple Music. This episode was recorded at Storycatcher Studios in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with production support from Brad O'Hara. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group, and you can find us online at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and you can locate all of our previous episodes at magicintheroom.com.